Good to have you here. Hey, we've been in this series, as Matt said, what am I here for? And it's a question we all ask. What am I here for? And what we're doing through this series is really identifying just 4 core purposes that God's called all of us to. And what's so special about these purposes is they transcend time. That it doesn't matter if you were born in the 4th century or the 13th century or where we are right now, you can outwork these purposes. That's what makes them so special. That's why I think God put them in there, that it doesn't matter which part of the world you're in. If you're in Kabul, if you're in Cairo, if you're in Chicago, if you're in the Hutt Valley, wherever you might be, hey, you can outwork these purposes in your life. And as we go through this series, just a little disclaimer here, what we're talking about week on week is incredibly simple. In fact, if you've been around church for a while, you'll just almost think, okay, here we go again. This is so simple. But what I want to suggest is when you actually look at this as a 4-week body of work, the profoundness of it is in the simplicity that comes with it. That individually these things aren't actually much more than simple, but when you look at what we're presenting over the 4 weeks, it's like, man, that's a pretty special body of work. And what makes it so profound is just how simple we've been able to make it. And so please do forgive me if it is sort of simple. But also, if you're new to church, if you don't normally go along to church, if you're trying to figure out Christianity, I know you'll really appreciate this because while it's simple, it's also very clear. And what we know is when people are trying to figure out faith, clarity is everything. And what a lot of Christians can do sometimes is make stuff very complex. But what we're hoping to do through this is make it very clear. Last week we talked about the first purpose, and that was we're here to pursue God personally. That all of us have got a purpose to pursue God personally. What I want to talk about today is the second of the 4 purposes, the second piece of the jigsaw. And here it is, it's so simple, but it's love one another. Well, one of the purposes God has got for us is that we are here to love one another. It's so clear. Last week we referenced what's known as the Great Commandment. And so let me read it to you. We only covered the first half last week. We'll hit the second half this week. Here's the whole thing. Jesus replied when asked, what's the greatest commandment? He said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. So we said, hey, pursue God personally. A second is equally important. Love your neighbor as yourself. The entire law and all the demands of the prophets are based on these 2 commandments. You see, what Jesus does is he starts off with this vertical relationship that we have with God. We've got to love God. But then he changes it, he switches it up, because what a lot of religions do is they say it's all about this vertical relationship between us and God. But what Jesus does by adding the second part is he said, no, it's not just about the vertical, it's about the horizontal. Because just as important as you love God is you've got to love your neighbor as yourself. You've got to love one another. And over the next few minutes, I'm just going to take you through what really is a New Testament survey and just help you see how clear this is. We're going to see how Jesus makes it even clearer than this and more powerfully than this. We're going to look at Paul, who wrote a lot of the New Testament. He makes it clear. Then we're going to look at Peter, who wrote a few books in the New Testament. He makes it clear. John, who wrote a bunch of the remaining books in the New Testament, he too makes it clear. It is so obvious as we look through the New Testament that we are called to love one another. We're going to go to John 13. In this passage, Jesus is with his disciples. He's with his closest followers. He gathers them around and he says this. He says, a new command I give you. And at that point, I imagine a lot of his disciples, their ears prick up a little bit. Some of them probably start thinking, oh no, right? He's going to give us a new command. What am I going to not be able to do now? Well, what's going to go missing in my life? Or what's please don't don't take sport off the list. God, don't make sport not there. Don't take music. What's he going to do? He says, a new command I give you. And then the next words that come out of Jesus' mouth are love one another. And so everyone in the crowd, not everyone, like the disciples that are there have probably been like, Jesus, not new. Been around for a long time. I can take you back. Deuteronomy, it says love one another. Are you getting forgetful? Something going on? Had a tough morning? Not much sleep last night? This isn't you. But then Jesus continues and he says, as I have loved you, you must love one another. And here what we really see Jesus do is what I call, he shifts the golden rule. A lot of us know what the golden rule is, right? That oftentimes when you're with a group of people and you're trying to come up with like, hey, well, what's important to our team? The one that always comes up, someone will be like, treat others the way you want to be treated. Like you just know that's going to come through. It's the golden rule. If you've heard of it, yeah? Can I give you a little yeah? Yeah, you've heard of the golden rule. Well, what Jesus does here is this is the new part. He ramps it up. He does this, no, I don't want you to just love others the way that they love you. He says, oh, I'm going to lift this. I'm going to elevate it. I'm going to make this harder for you. I want you to love others the way that I've loved you. Selflessly, sacrificially, entirely. He lifts it up. And I call that the platinum rule because it's not just treat them the way they treat you. No, love them the way that I've loved you. Doesn't matter how they love you or how they treat you. Your responsibility is to love them the way that I've loved you. And then he continues and he says, by this, by your love for one another, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. And again, we talk about this a fair bit here because it's so vital. Jesus says, look, the way that people are going to know that you're a follower of mine is because of your love for one another. Not necessarily how loud you can sing, not how eloquently you can pray, not how many scriptures you've got memorized, not by where you go on a Sunday morning, but by how you love one another. Jesus is painstakingly clear that we're called to love one another. Let's look at what Paul says. Paul in his letter to the Galatians, he says this. He says, the only thing that counts. He says there's a whole lot of stuff. There's a whole lot of things. But team, the only thing that counts, is faith expressing itself in love. It is your vertical faith expressing itself in horizontal love. The only thing that counts is faith expressing itself in love. Paul's pretty clear, right? It's pretty straightforward. Let's look at what Peter says. Peter starts off, says, above all. He's like, this is the top priority. I don't know what it's like for you, but if you're meeting with a client and the client comes to you and says, hey, I've got a list of things I want you to do for me. I want you to do this, I want you to do this, I want you to do this. And above all else, though, I want you to do this. You're like, okay, I'm going to focus on that. If your boss sits down and you go, say, I've got a list of things that we need to see happen this week, this month, or whatever. We've got this thing, we've got this thing, we've got this thing. And then she says, and above all else, you're like, okay, as long as I make sure I nail that, right? Oh, I've got kids at home, and occasionally I have to give them a list of things to do around the house. And so I'll be like, hey, can you empty the dishwasher? Can you clear the bench? Can you vacuum the lounge? Give them this list. And then sometimes I have to say, hey, and above all else, I have to give them one more command. Anyone else have to do this? And normally the command that I give them is because it's the thing that I've been asked to do, so I've got to make sure that gets done, okay? Everything else is cherry on top, but if my wife said I've got to do this, then I've got to make sure that's the thing that's done above all else. Okay? So above all, guys, keep your voice down because mum's sleeping. If the kitchen's still a bit of a mess, that's all right as long as you're quiet. But if you get the kitchen tidy, the lounge done, everything perfect, but you're noisy, we all lose. We all lose. Okay? Above all else. And here Peter says, above all, love each other deeply. Peter's been pretty clear. Above all, love each other deeply, for love covers a multitude of sins. New Testament's painstakingly clear. Here we have John, who then wrote also some of the other books in the New Testament. He says this, he said, dear friends, since God loved us that much, he's just spent the previous few verses talking about how much God has loved us. Since God has loved us that much, we surely ought to. We surely ought to. Again, he's saying this is really important. Surely you ought to do this. This is basic. This is fundamental. Surely you'll do this. We surely ought to love each other. And then he goes on, no one has ever seen God, but if we love each other, God lives in us, and his love is brought to full expression in us. When we take that vertical love of God and we translate it out into our horizontal relationships and we love others, that full expression of God's love is evident in us. But we've got to go horizontal with that love. It's not just this vertical up and down. It's no. What's most important is that we love other people. And then just a little bit later, sorry, I got the reference wrong, but a little bit later in that chapter, John writes this. He says, "For if someone says, 'I love God,' but hates a fellow believer, that person is a liar. For if we don't love people we can see, how can we love God whom we cannot see?" That's powerful, right? I don't know, but I wouldn't have the audacity to say that to you. I wouldn't be audacious enough to come up here and say, "Hey, if you hate someone, you don't love God." That's, lying's a pretty high thing. But I'm just quoting John, so it's all right. I didn't have this to lean on, it wouldn't come out my mouth. But John says it. You're a liar. If we don't love people that we can see, how can we love a God that we can't see? And John then goes on and he says this. And you've got to remember that when Jesus was there that day and he had that group around him and he says, "Okay, guys, listen up. A new commandment I give you." There in the front row was John. Take your notes. It was John. So we've got the Gospel of John, right? He says, "And he has given us this command." It goes back to that moment. "Those who love God must also love their fellow believers." Well, we talk about this a lot around here, and we often say it this way: we love an invisible God by loving visible people. We love an invisible God by loving visible people. I think if there was a statement that could sum up my life, what I'd love it to be is this: Clint loved God by loving the people around him. Like, if at the end of my life, man, that could be said about me, I'd be stoked. Clint loved God by loving people around him. So I think that's what the New Testament calls us to. We love an invisible God by loving visible people. Brother Lawrence, in his book, Practicing the Presence of God, that we referenced last week, he highlights this. And in the 1600s, he says, "We must practice our love for God by the love we have for our neighbor. For in the same way as charity or love for God makes us live in God, so the love of our neighbor makes God live in us." You say, man, this is so important. And it is. It's so clear through the New Testament. John Mark Comer, who's an author, who's a teacher, who I believe is probably the leading voice of our generation today on spiritual formation, like Eugene Peterson, Dallas Willard, John Ortberg have been in sort of previous decades. I think John Mark Comer is, when it comes to spiritual formation, has got an incredible voice. And his life's work is now in this space. And his latest book is Practicing the Way. And he says this, he says, "Love is the acid test of spiritual formation." He says, when it comes to spiritual formation, well, what's going to show if you're tracking right? There's a lot of things we could list off, but he says, no, our love. Love is the acid test of our spiritual formation. How well are we loving? There's so many things we could do, but he says, if you really want to know if you're maturing, if you're becoming more like Christ, the acid test, what it boils down to, is our love. And he gives us this question. The single most important question is, are we becoming more loving? We just think for a moment and ask yourself that. Are you becoming? I've got to ask myself, am I becoming more loving? Because what can often, man, happen is, as we go through life is we become less loving. We become more judgmental. Oftentimes when people focus on that high vertical relationship between them and God only, do you know what our work could be? Less loving in that horizontal space. We should be becoming more loving. If we're really pursuing God personally, He's going to help us to become more loving. And then John Mark says this, he says, not are we becoming more biblically educated or practicing more spiritual disciplines or more involved in church. Well, which are fascinating things for him to highlight, because he was a pastor. Now he's really spending all his time helping people understand the Bible better, and in particular learning about spiritual disciplines. And he's saying, hey, actually becoming biblically educated, not as important. Practicing more spiritual disciplines, it's important, but not as important. Becoming more involved in church, again, important, but not as important as are we becoming more loving. He goes on and says, all those things are good things, but not the most important thing. So we're called here, listen, to love one another. It's simple, right? It's simple. I warned you at the start, this was going to be simple. The New Testament team is so clear. Come on, one of our core purposes is to what? Is to show your neighbor how smart you are, is to Okay, let's go full participation. If you can't get this right, I've done a really bad job this morning, and just make me feel good like I'm actually communicating something that's very clear. One of our purposes is oh, come on. That's good. That's good. If you remember that next week, bonus points, okay? But this is one of our core purposes, is we're called to love one another. It's so clear. Jesus highlights it. This is how we should be known, team. Come on, for those of us who call ourselves Christians, this is how we should be known, because of our love for one another. Paul, the only thing that counts is faith expressing itself in love. Peter, above all, love each other deeply. John says the same thing. We've got to love each other. So to just continue this on, let me just share a few quick thoughts. If we're going to love one another, we must firstly prioritize people. We must prioritize people. Think of Jesus' life. What did Jesus prioritize? People. Jesus didn't come from heaven to earth to build like a nice big mansion. He didn't come to get a whole lot of money, to get really rich, have a big portfolio. Jesus stepped out of heaven and came to earth because of people. He knew the only thing that goes on into eternity is people. We too have got to prioritize people. How much of the incredible accounts of Jesus took place when he was going somewhere and he was interrupted on the way? He's going there and someone interrupts him, and Jesus had time to stop and be with that person. He prioritized people. We live in a world that prioritizes accomplishment. We live in a culture that's all about progress. And what that can mean for us is oftentimes we go through life. I go through life with the blinkers on, just looking at what's in front of me, what I'm trying to achieve, what I'm trying to do. And oftentimes in that, I can miss those divine interruptions, those people that are around me that Jesus has called me to love and wants me to love. And I've missed out on those opportunities because I've been too focused on accomplishing something. I've been too focused on what I need to do, and I haven't got space for people. Come on, some of us, the pace of life that we're living is so fast. We're going through it with so much in this direction that we're not prioritizing the people around us. And we would like to say, yes, I love one another. Yes, I prioritize people. But if we actually look at how we're spending our time, man, we're prioritizing accomplishment. We're prioritizing progress. We're prioritizing success in our career or success in this endeavor. But we haven't got time to know the people that are around us. We've got to make time. We've got to slow down. And in his book, David Brooks, he talks about two types of virtues. He talks about resume virtues and eulogy virtues. And when he talks about them, he says that resume virtues are skills that we bring to the marketplace. And we can spend time developing and cultivating these skills, and they're important if we're going to achieve things in our career. And stuff like, man, that person, she's really good at driving engagement. She can get a lot of people engaged in something. This other person, man, he communicates effectively, does such a good job at communicating. This person's incredibly strategic. They've got the ability to bring this stuff together like no one else. This person's like a visionary. They can see things that no one else can see, and man, they can do stuff. This person, they can build teams. And all of those stuff are resume skills. They look really, really good on your resume, or resume virtues. But what we really want are eulogy virtues. Those virtues that people are going to talk about when we're gone. Those virtues that say, hey, he was kind, she was loving, she was brave, she was courageous, he was available. And what we can do as we go through life, we can spend a lot of our time and a lot of our energy going after those resume virtues. But what we're better to spend our time doing is going after those eulogy virtues. And when you think about what sort of words you want to describe you, I guarantee those are those eulogy virtues that you want. And all of those are found by prioritizing people. Not accomplishment, not progress, but by prioritizing people. Come on, ask yourself this question. Are you really prioritizing people? Just just take a sidetrack here. I can't help but do this. It's our last week of promoting groups. And the reason we're so passionate about groups is because even in a room this size, you can't love everyone in this room. You might think you can, but I want to tell you, you're not Jesus. You can't do it. You cannot love everyone in this room to the way that we're called to love one another. But do you know what you can do? You can love some people. And that's why we encourage people to be part of a group, because it's in a group where, hey, you can know everyone's name. You look around this room, some of you that have been around for a while, man, you'll be able to name a whole lot of people in this room, but I guarantee there's a whole lot of people in this room whose names you don't know. You could be a really incredible encourager, and I reckon that you could encourage a few people in this room today, but you couldn't encourage everyone. You can care for a few people in this room today, but you can't care for everyone. And that's where the power of groups are, because it takes all these people that are sitting in rows and it puts us in circles. And I can know the name of everyone in the circle. I can encourage everyone in the circle. I can be encouraged by everyone in the circle. I can care for them and they can care for me. And one of the special things about groups is you do get to know each other in a slightly different way. And what's naturally human is that there's some people you connect with and there's some people that you don't, right? And one of the most special things that takes place in groups is you get put with or you get alongside people that aren't like you. And do you know what happens when you're with people that aren't like you? There's a little bit of sandpaper going on. There's a little bit of roughing at the edges, right? All of us that have been in a group before, that have experienced a group, have been in those groups, and there's those people that you're like, And sometimes it's because that person never shuts up, right? You're like, do you not realize how much you are talking? You're like 7% of the group and you've got 93% of the words. Sort yourself out. And then there's other people, right, that are in the group, they don't talk enough. Sitting there going like, why don't you ever say something? Like, do you come for the coffee? It's not that good. Like, contribute. And then you've just got other people that are just different than you, that think different than you, that were brought up different than you, and you're like, why do you do that with your money? Why do you do that with your family? Why do you parent like that? But did you know what? Those are the people that God often uses to grow us the most. Well, if I'm around people that are just like me, I don't really need to be patient because everyone thinks like me. I don't really need to be kind because everyone's just like easy. But it's those difficult people. And everyone's a difficult person to someone. So I don't think you're beyond this, right? I'm clearly not. I'm that one that everyone hates in their group, I'm sure. But this is the power of groups. And so we encourage you, hey, sign up for groups. Some of you guys are master procrastinators. You've been told so many times today, this is your last Sunday, this is your last Sunday, this is your last Sunday. Don't go home and be like, oh yeah, I was going to do it later. Don't do it on the way out the door. We're going to love one another. Just a practical side note. Let me move on. If we're going to love one another, we must prioritize people. We have to prioritize people. Second thing we have to do is we have to be willing to go first. You have to be willing to go first. Every interpersonal relationship has got some level of exchange that takes place. Someone has to go first. Someone has to initiate conversation. Someone has to do something kind. Someone has to invite them over for dinner at our house. And you go, oh, we'll invite them for dinner at our house and they never invite us back. Well, what if I try and talk with them and then they don't talk to me back? Well, what if I try and then do a nice gesture and they never return it? Right? My encouragement is, hey, let's be people who go first. Let's be proactive. Let's take initiative. And I just, in my head, can't imagine the level of community that would take place. If in a room like this, all of us said, hey, I'm the sort of person that will go first. Imagine the layers of love, the depth of community that would take place. If all of us said we're going to go first. In most environments, right, there's a small group of people who are the initiators, and they go first, and everyone else lives on their coattails, and hopefully they get caught up some way, shape, or form. But I'll tell you what would it look like for all of us to be, hey, I'm the sort of person who's going to go first. I'm going to just have the courage to go first. And if I invite them for dinner and they don't come, that's all right. If I invite them for dinner and they never invite me back, that's all right. If I try and connect with someone and it doesn't really go anywhere, that's fine. I'm going to be the sort of person that takes initiative. I'm going to be the person who goes first. Wouldn't that be the type of community we want to be a part of? But what it takes is all of us just saying, hey, I'm going to go first. I'm going to go first. If we're going to love one another, come on, this is a clear purpose that's on your life. You need to go first. You are not simply called to love those who are like you. I think it was Paul who writes, that it's easy to love those that love us. But Jesus calls us to love every one of us, not just some of us. We've got to be willing to go first. And then finally, we've just got to keep going. We've got to keep going. We've got to keep going. As Alia, not my daughter Alia, the singer Alia, if at first you don't succeed, never give up, but try again. Try again. I wish I could sing, If I could just belt that out, I'd feel so proud of myself. So untalented in so many ways. But there's so much truth in that. If at first you don't succeed, never give up, but try again. Try again. Try again. Come on, all of us have been hurt relationally in some way, shape, or form. You're not immune to this. The younger you are, you're like, you don't need to labor on this, Clint, because you're young, you're naive, life's good, everything's easy, everyone likes you, that's cool, you're young. And so some young people have experienced this to a large degree too, but I guarantee I've got the older people on my side here. You just got to keep going. Because getting hurt, it's a human thing. That all of us have been hurt relationally. All of us have had that friend that said something about us. All of us have had that person who shared something we didn't want shared. All of us have faced betrayal. All of us have been hurt relationally. Maybe because someone moved away, maybe because someone passed away. All of us have had to deal with hurt relationally. And do you know what we can then do? We can then start to put up barriers. We can start to live out protective mechanisms to stop other people coming in. Because we've been hurt once before, we don't let anyone get close to us because we're scared if they get close to us, they're going to hurt us too and they're going to leave us. So we start to leave others before they get the chance to leave us. We start to just put up a facade so what people see isn't really what's going on because we don't really want them to see what's going on. Because we had that person betray our trust, we don't trust anyone with our deepest secrets or our deepest dreams because we're too worried about what's going to happen to them. And the problem with this is that the very thing we're doing to protect ourselves is hurting ourselves. What we think's helping us is really harming us. And what we've got to do, and this isn't easy, and I know the stories of a number of people in the room, and I know some of the depths of the relational hurt, man, that you've experienced, that maybe you're still experiencing right now. And that wound is real, and that wound is painful. But man, what you need to do, what I need to do, is to remain soft, to remain wise, so that I can continue to love others and allow others to love me. It's easier said than done, and we're all going to take some hits. And if you've taken hits, can I just say, hey, that's not a you problem. All of us take hits. Sometimes, maybe, we get things wrong and we mess up, and some of those hits are our own naivety, or we've done something silly, or we've trusted that person again too quickly, and all that sort of stuff. So, there's some here, but the fact that you've taken hits doesn't mean there's something wrong with you, and you weren't created for a relationship. You were created for community. You just got to understand this is a human experience that we've all experienced. See, we must love one another. To do so, we've got to prioritize people. We've got to go first. We've got to keep going. And someone's sitting here and you're smart and you're going, yeah, Clint, those are great points. I like your thoughts. But have you got any scripture to back those up? Here's my scripture. The Gospels. Because this is how Jesus lived, right? Jesus prioritized people. He came to earth for you, for people. I talked about this a bit when I shared that one before. But Jesus prioritized people. Jesus went first. We love, as John writes, because Jesus first loved us. Paul says it this way, that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. He went first. Before you thought of him, he had thought of you. Before you had ever spoken to him, he gave his life for you. He went first. And he kept going. And he kept going. Jesus, man, he faced some pretty big difficulties in his life. He had a whole crowd of followers. And he said something, and then most of the crowd disappeared. And he felt what it was like to be rejected. Jesus had people that wanted to end his life. And all he was trying to do was help them. In the end, they did take Jesus' life. And who betrayed him? One of his closest group betrayed him and sold him for 30 pieces of silver. Come on, some of us have experienced betrayal. And we know how much that hurts. How good is it to know that we've got a God who understands what our betrayal was like? And he experienced it too. And then Jesus was killed by the very people he came to help. He kept going. He kept going. Let's go from the macro down to the micro. Think of your life for a moment. Maybe you're here and this is the first time you've ever come to church, or you're trying to figure out what Christianity is all about. Jesus kept going with you. He kept sending that right person into your path that you might not have thought about him for your whole life up to now. It could be 30 years, 40 years, 50 years. But Jesus kept going after you, even though you never thought of him, never opened up to him, never spoke to him. He kept going. And look who you are now. He kept going. For those of us that have been following Jesus for a while, come on. I know my story. How many times have I turned my back? I know God called me to do this, and I went and did this. Jesus said, Clint, you should be doing this. Very, very clear. And I went and did this. He makes it really clear for me, Clint. And in my head, I know I shouldn't do this, but I'm going to do it anyway. And I just, reject him, betray him, turn my back on him, even though I should know better. And do you know what? He still loves me. I know that's true of you too, that have been following God for a while. You have done things that you know you shouldn't have done to people that you shouldn't have done it to. And Jesus never gave up on you. See, Jesus went first. He prioritized people. And he kept going. And that's why I can say those things that, hey, that's how we should live if we're going to love one another. And lastly, one last point here. I heard someone say it this way once. That the New Testament, that there's a lot of commentary in there, or all the commands that were given in the New Testament, they're all really commentary to this idea that we're called to love one another. That all the other things we're told, like not to do or what we should do, it's all really commentary outworking this idea that we should love one another. See, like something we're told we shouldn't do, don't steal. Don't steal. So the reason we're told not to steal is because when I take something that's yours, I'm hurting you. I'm hindering you. Something you've worked hard for, I'm just taking it. I'm told not to steal because when I steal, I'm hurting you. I'm told not to gossip because when I get this group of people together and we're gossiping about you, what I'm doing is I'm pulling you down in order to make myself look better. And I'm shaping these people's opinion of you because I'm telling them something about you that I don't know about you. And that's hurting you. So I'm told not to gossip. Not because God doesn't want us to talk, but because when I'm gossiping about you, I'm hurting you. So we're told to flee sexual immorality, not because God doesn't want you to experience sexual intimacy in the right place, but because God knows that when there's sexual immorality, I'm hurting you and I'm hurting me. See, some of the biggest regrets people in this room have got come back to some sexual immorality in their life. Some of those memories that are hard to get past. Some of those things that you just, deepest regrets come from sexual immorality. Some people's regrets are because of your sexual immorality. God doesn't want us to do that to others, so he says, flee from sexual immorality. Not because he's trying to stop you from doing something, but because he doesn't want you to hurt people. All of this is told. So much of what's written in the New Testament, whenever it comes to interpersonal relationships, really is just commentary on this idea that we're called to love one another. So come on, just imagine. Imagine what it would look like as a community if we really loved one another the way that we're called to. Jesus said, this is how you'll be known as my disciples. Don't you think that's the type of community that would be the light to the world that we're called to be if we really loved each other like that? Don't you think people on the outside would look in and be like, Man, I don't know if I can believe all that they believe. I don't know if I can fully believe that Jesus came to earth and died and raised back to life. Like, I've never seen someone raised back to life. I don't know if I can believe that, but man, there's something about those people, the way they love each other, the way they care for each other. I want that. I want that. I want that for my family. I want that for my son, for my daughter. I want that for myself. That's the impact we can have on this world if we really do love one another. Let me pray and I'll hand it back to Matt. Yeah, Heavenly Father, it is so simple. Love one another. And I'm the first to put my hand up and say, man, I know what I should do, but so often I put those blinkers on and I place myself at the center. I want to do things that are going to benefit me, where I can receive, where it's just all about me. And I'm sorry for that. And Father, I pray that you can actually help us to really love one another. I pray that you can help us to shape our calendars and our days by prioritizing people rather than progress. I pray that you'll give all of us the courage to go first, not wait for others to initiate. And Father, in particular, I pray for those of us, man, that have got wounds. And I know in this room there's people with wounds, lots of us, some significant wounds. I pray, Father, that you'll do a special work in us so that you can keep us soft, so that we're open to new relationships, so we don't go down those destructive patterns that really harm us and hinder us and miss out on the purpose that you've got for us to love one another. Help us to be those people. In your name I pray. Amen.